year 2087, a Freedom of Information request resulted in the declassification of nearly 100,000 documents. These documents revealed the existence of a secret division formed as a skunkworks in the Central Intelligence Agency. This organization is known as the AORD and is still active to this day. The scope of the declassified documents covers the years of 1987 to 2037 and goes a long way to explaining the events that unfolded at that time, as well as the direction the path of history has taken as a result. Despite heavy redactions and documents left out entirely, the FOI release was one of the most shocking collections of data ever revealed to the public. These are those documents. Documents 5892382 to 5892574. Correspondences between Project Santa Fe Research Team and Directorate. Correspondences between May 5th, 2000 and November 1st, 2000. Recipient: Director. Sender: Research Team Leader Dr. James Robinson. Studies. Subject: Timeline extension and material component issue. I understand that a lot of people are pinning their hopes on this project, but now that I've been debriefed on the idea, I have some issues that I can already tell will be stumbling blocks, at least as long as the timeline is kept at the frantic pace it's set to now. AEI systems have, through the history of humanity, always been separated into two categories: real and fake. Now that we're beginning to understand what makes an AEI actually function, and the rules and processes that decide them, we are sure that there are exactly two types of AEI systems: subtle and dangerous. If Lockheed Martin wanted us to make a could slightly improve the perception of the United States across a city, we could probably whip that out by tomorrow. However, the AORD, the Directorate, and whoever it is that's providing the additional funding here doesn't want a magic trick. You want will take a lot of time to figure out. To my knowledge, no one has ever induced an arcane effect of this scale before, and if they did, it is very likely that they destroyed their own people and the entirety of their history along with them. I'm not saying it can't be done. Far from it. I'm absolutely ecstatic to see it through. What I'm saying is that it must be made perfectly clear to the stakeholders that this will take more time than we've been given. There are simply too many unknowns we need to hash out. There's already an immense amount of potential dangers we'll have to avoid, and it is all but a certainty that more dangers will reveal themselves as the research continues. This alone puts us well past the first deadline. There are more issues than that, though. One in particular popped in my head during the presentation. Material components. Nearly every working AEI system that the AORD has become aware of, and every single one that the AORD has put time into researching, requires a certain amount of material to produce an effect. Every piece of evidence and every experimental trial and attempted we've ever completed has shown us there is a direct ratio between the amount of material components and the strength of the final output. The ratio only becomes less favorable when there's only a single inducer and not a team of participants. Now, it isn't as cut and dry as payload weight to explosive energy. There are other factors, including symbolic significance, specificity, and many, many more, most of which we don't even understand yet. My point is that, with the current AEI systems we're working with, we'll essentially have to fill a warhead with 30,000 gallons of grave water and nearly 100,000 wrens born in the autumn. As you can imagine, the efficiency of such a weapon would not be any better than traditional armaments. Actually, from my estimations, it would probably amount to about 11 kilotons output at the very most. And that's only if the inducer pronounces everything right while watching it drop out of the plane and not breaking eye contact with it. The cost-to-benefit ratio will not be there with our current systems. We must either immediately get approval to experiment with other AEIs, or start working on modifying the ones we have to make them more worth it. Please reply as soon as you can. I'm likely to start running into a brick wall the second I send this out, so the quicker the better. Recipient: Director. Sender: Research Team Leader Dr. James Robinson. Studies. Subject: Progress Update and the Problem of Ethical Blowback. First off, I'd like to thank the Directorate for quickly amending our timeline. Everyone in the research team is working a lot more efficiently and more accurately now that we have reasonable expectations set. I also thank you specifically for allowing us to begin experimenting with other systems. It's always exciting to gain access to more hidden knowledge, and as the head of the studies in the R&D department, I was beginning to think that I was running out of hidden knowledge. It's true that the system doesn't have the same issue as the system and the more traditional systems. Now that we're no longer restricted by the logistics of procuring, implementing, and maintaining an absurd amount of material components, things have been going a lot more smoothly. We've already completed a scale test of our latest version using the system. It's startlingly effective, and there are a large variety of effects we can apply with the same amount of initial expenditure. We've largely been testing explosion effects and necrosis-inducing abnormal waveforms, each of which has been proven to be an imposing weapon, especially if we can manage to scale the effect to the strength we're aiming for. That said, we are running into an issue with the system as well, though we're not entirely certain it's damning yet. There's every possibility we can find a logical loophole, or more accurately an exploit, that would allow us to avoid this problem altogether. But so far, we've been completely unable to work around it. Essentially, it comes down to the quirk of the system. In exchange for not requiring as many ingredients or sacrifices, the inducer will essentially put their own fate on the line as collateral for the effect. This is certainly an overly simplified and much too magical way of describing it, but it is true in practice. The caveat is that any cursing or damaging effect that is applied to a living thing or things will be returned to the inducer with slightly reduced power. We had assumed that we could exploit this by having research subjects complete the induction, and then keeping them in a separated blast zone. Our thinking was that essentially just having to prepare a blast test for every time the weapon would be used would certainly be manageable enough. Unfortunately, it seems the blowback doesn't just apply to the inducer. Instead, it seems to follow some kind of trail of responsibility, presumably functioning similar to quantum observation. We're calling this effect the liability chain, and it has made much of the research team quite concerned with the continuing testing with this system, myself included, considering my pinky nail rotted off during the initial test. We're still studying the proportion of the effect in terms of payload to blowback, as well as how the spread of the energy is decided, or if it's always distributed evenly to all liable parties. There is some hope we'll be able to exploit this somehow, but the way forward remains to be seen. I will say, there's already an exception to the problem, though it isn't terribly actionable. We call this exploit the ethicality ratio. If the target, let's say a single person in this example, is fully deserving of the weapon's effects, as determined by guidelines and functionality we're so far ignorant of, then the blowback will be greatly reduced, or completely eliminated. This was not easy information to learn, as it required a lot of logical protections for myself and the research team. However, it was proven to be true when we convinced a research subject to use the current version of the weapon on another research subject who was guilty of incredibly heinous crimes. The inducer in this case, as well as myself and the research team, were completely unharmed. We've yet to determine if the inducing party's past ethicality will affect the level of blowback or not, but it does seem to be based only on the action of inducing the weapon's effect on the target. With that being the case, if we can't figure out a solution to this issue, I don't imagine we'll be able to convince the stakeholders to use this system at all, especially the president or the generals. We could, in theory, keep the decision to prepare and use the weapon to as small a group as we can, and separate the decision from anyone of high value. This, of course, comes with its own set of issues, as anyone who would be authorized to make such a decision would inherently be high value. If they weren't, they obviously wouldn't be making the decision to deploy the weapon. Regardless, I do think this is something we should keep in our back pocket. It's possible that at some point in the future, there will be an enemy of the United States so insidious that using what amounts to a perfectly silent bomb would be considered the ethical decision. Understandably, this probably isn't what the stakeholders want to hear, and so we will be attempting to utilize different systems as we continue research on a potential exploit. To that end, I was weighing the options for the next system to try. My instincts tell me there will be some value in adapting the system for modern scientific knowledge, but we will of course take whatever suggestion you and the rest of the Directorate think is best. Recipient, Director. Sender, Research Team Leader Dr. James Robinson. Studies. Subject, legal experts needed for Covenant. As expected, the system has some remarkable ways to cause serious damage, and with no ethical boundaries or tangible cost. We've already drawn up several designs for full-scale weapons with various added effects on customization. There is one small issue, in that every effect induced using the system is done at the behest of a subdimensional Class 5 intelligence, known as... Smaller and even medium-sized effects don't seem to cost anything other than reverence to... Though that has become a point of great contention amongst the research team as of late. However, larger effects require a covenant to be made directly with the intelligence. As is protocol, we've treated all interactions with due caution, preparation, and reality quarantining procedures. Itself doesn't seem to be terribly unreasonable or unpredictable. In fact, it's been very accommodating and polite in all negotiations. The trade-offs for the weapon effects we desire have been set at seemingly very manageable levels of sacrifice. It's friendliness and favorable contracts that have made us suspicious. All the literature we have on this AEI system insists that each and every effect will bring the inducer some sort of poetic retribution or punishment. And at least according to the dossier, this doesn't always apply directly to the inducer, but to the things the inducer may care about. Considering the invocation calls on a Class 5 intelligence, there is every reason to believe that it will apply the retribution to the decision makers rather than the inducer, essentially giving us the same problem we had with the system, but more graphically violent. That said, the terms as set out by do indeed seem favorable. We've been extremely specific with our additions, requests, and amendments, and has agreed to every change we've put forward. Still though, myself and a majority of the rest of the team feel we must be missing something terribly important. So we'd like to request a consultation with one or two legal experts. I'm not sure if you'll have one with the proper clearances right now, but if we need, we can just get a civilian legal team and tell them it's research for a fantasy novel. Let me know what we can do, as I have no desire to move forward with this system until we can get some expert assurance that we won't be stepping on the devil's tail, no pun intended. Considering the nature of Project Santa Fe, there's every chance even the smallest loophole in the language of the Covenant could allow the intelligence to wreak havoc on the United States of America, or the world as a whole. Once again, your bomb's worth of arcane blowback is something the Earth has never seen before, and we have to assume it's even worse than we're expecting it possibly could be. Recipient, Director, Sender, Research Team Leader Dr. James Robinson. Studies. Subject, experiment ended without approval. I'm writing to inform you that I cancelled all experiments using the AEI system. After bringing in those lawyers, the Class 5 intelligence associated with the AEI started becoming more and more irritable with the team's continued insistence to think over the terms before agreeing. During the last experiment, this conflict started to take a turn for the worse, and I alone made the decision to pull the plug. No one else signed off on it, it was all me, and I believe it was the right decision. When you have an angry demigod hurling threats at you, it becomes clear that the current path is a dead end. So, essentially, I called an audible. If the Directorate wants to take punitive measures, I won't resist, but I hope you'll understand this was the proper decision, and I didn't have much time to make it. Waiting for approval would have put me and my team in danger, and that's likely the case for surrounding areas as well. I'm not exactly sure how much energy that thing can release at once, but I know how much it brought with it. It was in the ballpark of 10 to the joules, and that was an arresting state. It was on the verge of causing a natural disaster just from getting peeved at us, and I don't even want to know what happens if it loses its temper. Anyway, assuming the Directorate sees my side of things, I will be carrying on researching other AEI systems until such a time as I'm told to stop. I do recommend that you let anyone in the AORD that uses the system to claim no knowledge of Project Santa Fe. In fact, it's probably better to have them actually have no knowledge of Project Santa Fe. I'm pretty sure can tell when a human is lying. Recipient, Director, Sender, Research Team Leader Dr. James Robinson. Studies. Subject, combining AEI systems and plague demonstration. We've been making some astounding progress now that we've begun combining different AEI systems. We're also learning more than ever about the quantum mechanisms of AE induction as well as the associated field shifts. We've never been closer to the right track than we are right now. I can just feel it. We don't have a finished product yet, but we're making massive discoveries each day, all of which could have potential field applications in the future, or if combined or disguised with traditional technology, the present. That said, I understand some of the stakeholders, as well as our biggest critics in the Directorate, will be coming by for a demonstration of what we've come up with so far. I greatly appreciate the forewarning and the personal risk you took in accomplishing that. It won't have been for nothing either, as we've developed something that will certainly work as proof of concept, as well as the unforeseen benefits of Project Santa Fe. I won't bore you with the details, but essentially by combining the ritual concepts of the system and the preemptive sacrifice of the system, we've managed to make a workable middle ground that doesn't require material components to be present at the time of the induction. Now, it's not quite to the power level that we need for the final device, but we've used it to create some very interesting and widespread effects. Namely, we've recreated a number of the 10 plagues from the Bible. So far, we've turned 1 million gallons of water into fresh blood. We've summoned 2 million frogs and 13 million locusts, both of which are apparently extant somewhere else on Earth at the time of induction. Shouldn't be a problem, they're common species. By tomorrow, we'll be able to give a city the size of Moscow massive, though non-lethal boils, and all for less material cost than a single Tomahawk missile. Now, we are running into a bit of an issue while trying to cross the border from non-lethal to and if I'm being honest, this combination of AEI systems might not even allow for a direct human death to be one of the inducible effects. It won't matter though, as long as we can get through the demonstration without the funding being pulled. Since we're already working on the next combination, and it is looking to be an even more productive vein than the current configurations. On that note, as requested, I've prepared 2 and I've sent your courier to bring them to you in Langley. I don't know what you need such a thing for domestically, but that's your own business. Gods know you've done enough for me. Whenever you want an arcane tool, just let me know. I'll make it top priority. Happy hunting. Recipient, Director Sender, Research Team Leader Dr. James Robinson. Studies. Subject, we've made a new AEI. As the subject says, we've created a new AEI system. Not out of whole cloth, of course. We used the existing alchemical system as a base and made serious alterations. Myself and Dr. Patel realized that the rather underwhelming effects of alchemy may not be an issue of proper evocation or any of the other 5 pillars, but instead a massively outdated understanding of the nature of chemistry and matter as a whole. So, on a lark, we decided to see what would happen if we updated it using our current knowledge of quantum physics and chemistry. The result is a much more effective and powerful version of the AEI system that is a completely different paradigm for material necessity. We already know that it isn't a weight-to-energy ratio like other simple systems, and it hasn't switched to weighted retribution either. We're not entirely sure what's deciding efficacy of the materials just yet. Sometimes the material will produce a much larger effect, and sometimes it will be nearly insignificant. I'm sure we'll soon be able to understand what the determining factor is. It's only a matter of time, and when we do understand it, we may well have our... Oh, I almost forgot. We're calling it the Robinson-Patel Quantum Field Delineated Alchemical System, or RPQFD Alchemy for short. It doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, but we wanted to make sure the changes we made to the initial system were well understood by anyone attempting to use it. I hope you'll make sure that makes it into the official records for Project Santa Fe at such a time as official records are allowed to exist. Make sure it's Robinson Patel and not Patel Robinson, by the way. It just sounds better. Recipient, Director Sender, Research Team Leader Dr. James Robinson. Studies. Subject, breakthrough in material value. We've discovered the determining factor for a material component's variable output in RPQFD alchemy. It wasn't exactly intuitive to find out, but in retrospect it makes a lot of sense from an arcane perspective. Sometimes I get so locked into specific measurements and experimental processes that I forget we're essentially... I've gotten sidetracked. The crux of the material's efficacy, or what we're now referring to as its value, is its subjective significance to the inducer, or its sacrificial weight. Naturally, this is an extremely difficult value to put an exact number on, but considering how many ways we have to scan a subject's brain and thought processes now, that may not be a problem for much longer. Now that we know how to give our effects the mustard, we're going to be testing what sort of materials have the most efficient and easily managed sacrificial weight. Depending on our findings, we could have a prototype within the week. I wouldn't be at all surprised if it ended up under budget as well, as long as things go as we expect. We're hoping to find a kind of material that will have an extremely high sacrificial weight to mass ratio. This will depend on the subject, of course, but it wouldn't be at all surprising if we found a reliably valuable material or materials that weighed less than 50 pounds. I'll keep you clued in, but please express my hopefulness to the stakeholders. I understand the itching for results as they keep sending their couriers to keep an eye on me. I'd rather do without the extra sets of eyes. I understand they're contract bound to the directorate and the other higher-ups, but they're giving the research team the creeps. It's hard to remain steady with a beaker in your hand if you keep getting chills up and down your back. Anyway, see what you can do, and I'll do the same. Recipient, Director, Sender, Research Team Leader Dr. James Robinson. Studies. Subject, stumbling block with SW valuation. I definitely should have seen this coming, but we're running into a bit of a wall in collecting suitable materials to use with the research subjects. It stands to reason that a material that has great sacrificial weight will be something the subject cares for a great deal. I think you'll already have seen the issue yourself, but just in case, the research subject selection process is designed to pick out subjects that have little to no empathy or care for anything outside of themselves. We need a subject that has something they care about deeply, but we're only allowed to have subjects that don't care about anything. Unfortunately, we can't have the subjects sacrifice themselves, as it would interrupt the induction significantly. There may be a way around it, but it would require a rather complicated deception and an intensely unobservant research subject. Essentially, I'd have to trick them into sacrificing themselves willingly. They don't necessarily have to know they'll die, but they do have to put themselves in clear and present danger. On the other hand, there's a much easier way around this issue, a special exception to the RSS ethical protocols. It's not ideal, but it would be much easier than tricking someone into killing themselves on short notice from the president in a time of war. They don't even have to be particularly good people. They can still be monsters even, just as long as they have something they care more about than themselves, ideally by quite a large margin. Of course, as is the case when subverting any ethical regulation, this will be sure to increase the likelihood of early resignations or, I hate to say it, even whistleblowers. Not everyone on the team is a true red-blooded patriot like myself, as I'm sure you know. If this is the route we choose to take, we'll need an additional layer of secrecy between the research subjects and my team. Doesn't have to be much, just a brig that's a little bit further away from the lab and adjusted microphones in the observation shelters. Even the real monsters tend to cry during the experiments, so I don't believe having an atypical subject will cause that much of a stir as long as they don't get buddy-buddy with the team. Anyway, that's my idea for now. I'm sure you've already been informed by the other members of the Directorate or their couriers. Until we hear back, we won't be operating at full efficiency. I'll have to have half the team try to design a way to complete the induction with an unknowing self-sacrifice to see if that's even a real option, while the other half of the team starts looking down other alleys. P.S. Congratulations on your anniversary with the agency. How time flies, huh? Glad you're still with us, helping steer the ship. Lord knows what would become of the AORD if we didn't have you. Recipient, Director, Sender, Research Team Leader Dr. James Robinson. Studies. Subject. Incident. As instructed, we started to modify the system the same way we'd done for alchemy. It seemed to be going quite well, and I do think that this, at least, bodes well for future attempts, considering how fluidly the process of updating an AEI system has gone now that we've completed once before. That said, there are a few oversights in the scaled-down experiments that, in theory, we could have foreseen and prevented. I say in theory because it was, and I stand by this, absolutely inconceivable for an AEI retribution effect to go so far sideways that it escapes our sensor range. Normally these types of things are incredibly direct and specific to the inducing party or parties, so when we didn't catch the energy being sent 3 miles east, we thought we'd made a miracle. In all appearances, the experiments showed us the effect of an asymmetrically powerful AEI system with 0 retribution. Essentially free energy. We were practically popping champagne there and then, but I didn't let us get ahead of ourselves, or at least I thought I hadn't. We repeated every one of our experiments dozens, if not hundreds of times at several different power scales, and each and every single time, the retributive energy was sent outside of the range of our sensors, and by some terrible twist of fate, outside of the sight line of anyone in the entire Air Force Base. It was an absolute fluke that nobody noticed. Earnestly, I believe it may be some translational effect of the system itself. I think that, perhaps, by updating the system, we may have given it a kind of intelligence, or at least some quirk of probability that either intentionally or by its own mechanics made it impossible to find out that we had missed something. I understand this may sound like I'm dodging responsibility, but this is absolutely possible in the field of studies, and considering the diligence with which we tested and retested our findings, I think it may even be more plausible than not. Regardless, there were oversights, and of course I will shift the associated damages from my own funds. For what it's worth, I was planning on doing that from the moment I found out. Of course, it doesn't change the fact that the town of was in practice destroyed, and it doesn't change the fact that the AORD will be covering this incident up for decades to come. Try as I might, we can't find any way to remove the shadows. We at least stopped them from multiplying and moving around randomly, but I just don't see them going anywhere for a good long time. My deepest apologies to the Directorate for this disgrace, to the AORD for my indiscretion, and to the agency as a whole for my failure to observe the truth of the situation. I'm ordering some dirt out of pocket to see if the town can literally be covered up, or if the shadows will just rise to the top. It'd be nice if we could just bury it. I could really use a break. Recipient, Director. Sender, Research Team Leader Dr. James Robinson. Studies. Subject, a word of caution about... I understand your concern, and the concern of the Directorate as a whole with our lack of progress in the last few months. Surely the incident hasn't won me any goodwill either, but all that aside, I must still state my resistance to implementing the system. If I had the authority to make this decision, I would outright forbid its use, both here and in the AORD in general. Yes, it is very strong. Yes, it is a much different form of AEI system that lacks many of the drawbacks of other systems. Yes, in theory, it could be used to make a devastatingly powerful weapon that would surely make our opponents think twice about standing up against us. That said, it is my opinion, as well as the opinion of the majority of the research team, that the potential costs greatly outweigh the benefits. After all, we're only aware of these benefits because the system, and more generally, it's been weaponized against the AORD on several distinct occasions. I hate to be melodramatic, but it's no exaggeration to say that the system has put more stars on the wall than the KGB. You know me. You know how I work. If it is truly the will of the Directorate, as representatives of these great United States, I will put my whole back into testing the system and seeing just how far down the sickening rabbit hole of pain and darkness it will take us. I just want you, personally, to consider if a weapon made with is really worth the path we'd have to take to get it. I'm sure I don't have to tell you what would happen if any of this made it out to the public. It'd be more than a circus. It'd be a carnival, a zoo, and an entire clown college. I'd be lucky to just be hanged. God forbid it kills any civilians. Anyway, I've said my piece. Let me know the decision on your earliest convenience. Recipient, Director, Sender, Research Team Leader Dr. James Robinson. Studies. Subject, Implementation of the system. Despite my misgivings, I'm having a hell of a time researching this batshit AEI. As expected, it's intensely powerful and absurdly cheap. Even at a medium scale, the effects are positively devastating, and all it costs is the of a few research subjects and a few bad dreams for the staff. Of course, I mean that literally. No one here is getting PTSD now that we have the drug, but one of the side effects of being involved in AE induction is a palette of intense nightmares, and for the more weak-minded among us, waking visions. All said, though, progress is going well. We expect to scale up by the end of the month, though there have been some potentially problematic results when trying to increase the output. It's such a chaotic system that we still don't fully understand what goes into deciding the output. To be honest, it's unlikely we'll ever know for sure. There are simply too many variables, from subdimensional interference to Class 4 intelligent direction. It's even been posited by Dr. Patel that the prime physical plane of reality has some sort of rejection mechanism that occasionally overpowers the induction of effects. There's too much to sift through, especially with the deadline looming. However, I am confident we'll have some manner of large-scale weapon effect by Christmas. Oh, and by the way, the intended effects, the ones that we've been using the system to induce, are across the board terrible. Absolutely awful. Occasionally disgusting, but always repugnant. I still believe that it would be a mistake to ever use this weapon, at least not under our own flag. I shouldn't hash this out again, but I need to mention it. This AEI makes horrors like the world has never seen, and once it sees them, they will never unsee them. Recipient, Director, Sender, Research Team Leader Dr. James Robinson. Studies. Subject, the incident. The town of is gone, as are the shadows that the last incident had left there. The data for the test went uncollected as the observation shelters that housed the sensors were destroyed. We expected this test to output around 11 kilotons of destructive force. What we unleashed was more like 11 megatons, and that may actually be sugarcoating it, as there's no real way to gauge the energy output of the after effects. We don't even know how long they'll last. Hopefully they'll fade soon, but my gut is telling me that they may be stuck there for an eternity. We checked the math hundreds of times. We replayed every test from every angle hundreds, if not thousands of times. We spread sensors far and wide just to be sure we wouldn't have a repeat of the incident. We had every reason to believe that upscaling the test would not create such an enormous break from the bell curve, and we even prepared for a large deviation just in case. Now Dr. Patel and 5 of my research team are, in essence, gone to the world. I claim no responsibility for this atrocity. This is clearly the fault of the Dark Faith and its hideous patron. It just doesn't make sense any other way. This must be its retribution for all of its believers we've put into blessed soil. If it isn't the hand of some subdimensional demigod, I truly don't understand anything about the arcane or studies. Regardless, what's done is done, and we're doing our best to find a way to undo what can be undone. It surely won't be able to bring Patel and the other researchers back, but I will do my best to ensure we find a way to let them rest in peace. I know I keep saying this every time, but we can't use this weapon. We just can't. The world will never forgive us. I'm no Oppenheimer. I won't tell you what to do, but take my word as a colleague and as an old friend, this trail only leads to madness and despair. We must change lanes before it's too late. I know you understand, but it's only you who can convince the rest of the Directorate. With this in mind, I've attached an audio log of an interview we did with the deceased Dr. Patel after the blast. Show it to the others and see if you can bring them back to my earlier ideas. Shock and awe should only go so far, and this is beyond the pale. Just listen, you'll see what I mean. Audio log 14224, Project Santa Fe. Dr. Patel, can you hear me? Dr. Patel, if you can hear me, just let me know. Kieran. If you can give me any sign that you're still partially in the physical plane, we may be able to help you. Can't tell if that's an answer, Kieran. Oh, Kieran. Recipient, Director, Sender, Research Team Leader Dr. James Robinson. Studies. Subject. The plan for now. I extend my most sincere thanks for speaking on my behalf to the stakeholders. I know you did all you could do. Unfortunately, most of these bureaucrats and alumni hires have never spent a day in the field, much less seen Arcane Induction firsthand. I know I shouldn't speak ill of my superiors, but I have a sinking feeling in my gut that just won't matter after this next test. In the run-up to the trial, I'm more certain than ever that the very essence of the faith is out to get us. And by us, I mean the entire AORD. Maybe even the United States. There hasn't been a trial without at least one injury or mental breakdown since the incident, and as soon as the decision came down to continue developing the system, the nightmares have only gotten worse. I very much doubt the pattern will change when we push the output into the next scale. On the plus side, your co-director's couriers have been unable to observe us as a side effect of stepping on the devil's tail, so to speak. They must be frightened of what we're meddling with, and I don't blame them. Since this is the case, though, I've made the call to send most of the research team out for the upcoming trial. We won't get as much data. It would necessitate a second test if it goes well, but my instincts are telling me it won't. Since my very brief stint in AC training, I've learned how accurate those types of feelings can be. I'll be left with a skeleton crew made up of those who understand the risks and still want to see what happens, and then we'll detonate the device. To tell the truth, their dedication to the study may outstrip my own. I've gotten old, and with my age, I've come to understand that some things are better left alone. I can't fight my curiosity, though. I never could, and so I'll be staying for the test as well. Remember, if this goes the way I think it will, the Directorate will have no choice but to abandon this line of research. But that will only work if they understand what happened. I've subverted protocols and connected the research station to an off-site backup. This way, if the entire research station is destroyed, we should still be able to show them what happened. If that data and my previous testimony isn't enough to sway them, then I guess that's just as far as we'll get as a country. If I'm right, though, they'll send the project back into the safe territory and keep it there. And when they do, you tell them to implement my CO2 idea. It isn't as strong as a hydrogen bomb, but we've never actually used a hydrogen bomb in a war anyway. That idea is subtle, and we may be able to use it without breaking the masquerade. Just do what you can. If I don't contact you after the test, then you'll know what happened. Thank you for your years of friendship and mentoring, and please continue on as a steward to this division. We need you now more than ever. Goodbye. Recipient, Director, Sender, Research Team Leader, Dr. Studies and Engineering. Subject, CO2 Displacement Weapon Test. As you requested, we've built and tested the Robinson-Patel alchemy prototype. It was a complete and utter success. Every atom of oxygen in the area was turned silently and unnoticeably into CO2 gas, and all 7 herds of cows were suffocated immediately. This is certainly a unique approach to a WMD, and I do appreciate the potential for discrete strikes. After all, we already know of several natural events that can cause a sudden influx of CO2, or another oxygen-displacing gas. We may well be able to make an entire city going dark look like a freak accident. We'll be continuing to refine it until it's as efficient as we can possibly make it, but I admit that most of the work was already completed by my predecessors. I don't know whether or not the Directorate wanted to keep the project going to research other wartime applications. If that is the way we're moving forward, I would like to request a change in location, and maybe a shuffling of the staff as well. Nearly all of the surviving research staff are sullen and sleepless. There's absolutely some ominous extra-normal feeling to this place. It's as if each square inch of the testing area is badly haunted, and that goes for the temporary buildings we've set up as well. I understand this may seem insensitive, but I'm going to have a hard time doing research in a place like this. If Project Santa Fe is to continue, I recommend we change venues and let this place serve as a memorial to those lost in the incident. Please update me as more information becomes available, and I will continue my research as usual. I look forward to working with you from now on. Recipient, Director, Research, Sender, Team Leader, Dr. Benson, James Robb, Studies. Subject.
Director, if you receive this message, you must keep the test area clear for as long as you can. It's very dangerous here, but we've managed to set up a laboratory with the equipment and supplies that were transported alongside us. We weren't killed. We were transported to a subdimensional space where we are now trapped. On the off chance that it does, I beg you to keep the test area clear. We're trying to find a way to return. It's going to take a long time, but it's technically possible. It seems incredibly unlikely this will reach you uncorrupted, but I don't know how long you can keep that land secured, but I'd appreciate your best effort. If the testing area becomes occupied, there's a high chance it will go terribly wrong. I understand this will be considered a potential existential risk to the country and the agency, but I have a chance to come see my own star on the wall, and I don't want to miss that opportunity. Look, the skeleton crew and myself, we don't want our souls to remain in this place when we die. There's a ritual in the backup that can shut the connection permanently. I think. Relatively certain I can keep anything else from coming through. Please, please, please keep the test site clear. Just this one last favor. Just this one last favor. If you get this message, keep the test site.
Recipient, Director, Sender, Research Team Leader, Dr. Studies in Engineering. Subject, Site cleansed. Progress continues. I implemented the induction you sent me, and it worked a treat. I don't know who could have possibly come up with that, since this is such a new AEI, but ever since we completed the induction, the ominous feeling around the test site has completely disappeared. The research team is getting more sleep, and, as I understand it, the phantoms from the incident are beginning to fade. I very much appreciate your assistance, and be sure to send my utmost regards to whoever the researcher was who created that ritual. Absolute genius. In other news, we're nearly done with the production of the version, and at this point I feel we're just gilding the lily. Any further efficiency we achieve will come at the cost of time lost for furthering the research of large-scale AEs. On that note, I have some pretty interesting ideas for new implementations of the system, and I think you and the Directorate will like to see what comes of them. Let me know. For now, we'll continue the work. FOI is written, produced, and edited by Kit Curtis. The theme song, Illuminati Swagger, was produced by Albert Behar and made available on Upbeat.io. Upbeat.io has lots of royalty-free music, and a disturbing amount of it is very good. Today's episode was called Project Santa Fe, and it's based on the undeniable fact that if magic were real, the government would use it to make a weapon of mass destruction. If you like this show and want to hear more of it, please DM me on Instagram, and I will send you the location of one of my mini dead drops for you to give me cash. Make sure you're not followed, and thank you for listening.